First off, I decided to use this video format because I really liked the way the TED presentations were made. And obviously, you guys aren't paying hundreds of dollars to come have my amazing wisdom of Chad Houston to be bestowed upon you. So, we're going to do it in more of a YouTube format, which I think is more appropriate for the class, anyways. So, instead of being all cool and dressed up with my black background and my PowerPoints, we're going to just do it underneath my Kandinsky. And right back there. Well, right back there. Reverse. What I'd like to talk to you about today is the afterlife. And you might think, oh my god, no way. Or what the hell, what do you know about it? You've never been there. And you're right, I haven't. But I'm not really talking about persuading one way or the other, because to be honest, I don't really know how I feel about it. But rather bring to light the irony, not irony, bring to light how much different it is than, say, something like religion. Because I think the two are totally separate. Totally separate. Because there's more of a collectiveness when it comes to the idea of an afterlife. You're allowed to have your own views about it, and at the same time, it brings people together. Let's just, for instance, let's look at heaven and hell or whatever. I mean, we know absolutely nothing about the two. Even if you're like a hardcore Christian or whatever, and you're like reading it and you're like, oh my goodness, I mean, really, most of what's in there about the two are metaphorical. So we really don't know. But we come up with our own ideas, and heaven and hell, well, mainly heaven, because none of us really think about ourselves going to hell, start to reflect what we like as people. If you're really into rock and roll, you're like, oh my goodness, I just can't wait to get to heaven. There's going to be rock and roll blaring every street. And then if you really like it, are into gardening, like, oh, it'll be great. There'll be fields and vineyards, and I can just work my tomato plants. And you who like your rock and roll can stay over in that street, and I won't have to see you. And I can tend my garden over here, and I don't have to see you. And it'll be paradise for the both of us. Hooray! But then, at the same time, when you come down to like doctrinal things, when you're dealing with something, say, like religion, churches will split over whether or not you should do communion every Sunday if you should only do it once a year. Like, that's also a really big deal. But the fact that this person thinks rock and roll is blaring to the kingdom of God, and this person thinks that tomato plants are everywhere, doesn't affect anybody. So that there's a collectiveness to the idea that we're allowed to think differently about this place, and at the same time it can bring us together, which I think is a unique attribute for any thought. We can't even do that with economical policies or political standpoints. We can't think differently and come together on very many issues at all. But there's a limit to it. We can only think differently as long as we agree that we are finally going to the same place. And the afterlife itself is a relatively new idea when you look at the span of humanity. I mean, it's an idea that's lasted, what? Maybe it started 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. I mean, the ancient people did not believe in an afterlife. They thought that when you died, you were gone. To the Greeks, life was like a leaf changing with the seasons, that it blossomed, it turned green, and then it turned brown, it crumpled up and fell on the ground and died, and thus you were forgotten. The only way to be remembered, the only way to live on eternally, was to do something that you'd be remembered for, to be great, to have honor, and to enjoy life at the moment, because there weren't many of them left. Life and death are very depressing to the ancient people, which is why one of the reasons why the cult of Christianity and other cults like the cult of Isis had such following in the Roman Empire. One thing is they permitted hope, but they were so hard for the Romans to stop, because with Christianity, they were like, you can kill me, you can feed me to the lions, it doesn't matter, my essence is going to heaven, and I will be A-okay. Now, with the cult of Isis, for those of you who don't know anything about it, I'm going to give it, like, it's summed up in a very generic nutshell. pretty much when you died, Isis reincarnated you. So for them, the Romans hated them just as much as the Christians. But if you someone, what do you call a follower of the cult of Isis? An Isonian? I don't know. If you were to throw this person who followed Isis, her cult, into the lion's den, they would be like, fuck you, this lion can eat me, I won't bow down to Caesar, because hopefully Isis will bring back this lion, or another one, and then I'll come after you and eat your poor ass. And that's kind of the way they viewed it. It was very similar to Christianity, but and had the same potential at certain points in its history as Christianity. It had one God, you good people were rewarded. In essence, not saying, never mind, we're not going to get into a doctrinal debate about Christianity and who's rewarded and who's not. So reincarnation is what I actually want to talk to you about, because it's an interesting idea, and when you actually look at it, the sense that it makes kind of surpasses the immediate reaction that you have to it, like, oh, that's stupid, or oh my goodness, that's for monks up in the mountains of the Himalayas, or whatever you think about it, or only crazy tree-hugging hippies believe in that. It's just because they need something to feel good about themselves. But when you actually look at it, it's a little bit unnerving, I would say. And I'm going to make a small disclaimer before I continue, is that personally, me, Chad Houston, I don't believe in reincarnation, but I think, yet anyways, who knows, but probably by the time I'm done talking about it, I'll believe in it, because I think that everything I have to say is the word of truth. It offers possibilities that I think deserve exploration. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look at reincarnation without any sort of religious aspect in it whatsoever. I want to look at it from a completely neutral standpoint. Completely from the fact of this is what happens with matter. And we see that. We, much like evolution, we see reincarnation happening around us all the time, and we can't deny it. And this isn't a new idea by any means. This has already been talked about, and this is just kind of giving you a little bit of background about where I'm going with this. But you see it happen. A tree falls in the forest. Not does anybody hear it, that doesn't matter. What happens is that the tree turns into food for bugs and animals, and then new life. That's new trees. Like, you've been walking, I hope all of you at one point in your time have walked through the woods, and you'll see these trees like falling over, and like random plants will be like growing out of them that aren't part of that tree, but that the essence of that tree is essential for the new life to grow. And it's like universal law that new life can only come out of destruction. I mean, we see it from the biggest of the big to the smallest of the small. Galaxies collide with one another. Planets are destroyed, stars erupt, only to create new stars, new galaxies. The matter that makes these things up never ceases to exist. Its form just changes. And you're like, oh, well, duh, Chad, that's boring. We all know that. It's like you said, it's like evolution. We can see it, but I don't believe in it. But I know that if I throw an animal into a surrounding it's not familiar with, it will adapt to it. Well, duh, that's just science. But I think the interesting point to look at is that happens throughout the entire universe, where life can only come from death, and new life from the same material only comes from death, until you get to this awkward little system with one star, and on the third planet that circles the star, there's a peculiar destructive race of